Lisa Gore here, Lisa Lee. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me again. I really appreciate you taking the time out to watch and view. I hope you're going to subscribe because, you know, it's going to be some testimonies that I think is going to be beneficial to hear. Okay? So today I want to follow up with the parenting type testimony, and I would like to share my testimony about just having the type of dad that I had and then not having the dad, and how God brought me through that and how I'm able to live now on the other side of it with joy. Okay, so I'm going to start with a poem, and I'll be reading from my book Colors of a Butterfly, right? And this chapter about my dad is good and bad. He is my dad, and that's how we're gonna start this off. Dynamite Dad. So I wrote this, Dynamite Dad. So I wrote this poem January 2008 when he passed away, and I've written this poem for his funeral, and I was supposed to read it, and when I heard someone from the pulpit reading the poem, like, I really almost lost it. So I had created his obituary. I created, you know, the information for the obituary. I put everything together, and I created this poem, and it was understood like it was read by daughter Lisa Gore. So when the lady that I never saw in my life proceeded to read the poem that I wrote for my dad, I literally almost lost it. I was about to stand up in the church and be like, no, you know. And my husband, sitting right beside me, basically calmed me down. He said, it's going to be okay. You're going to still read it. Read it for yourself, you know, this and that and the third. So he was able to, you know, calm me down. So that's a little backstory about the poem. But here we go. No matter how many times you failed to catch my tears, whether you were far or whether you were near, you were my dynamite dad. You were proud of your baby girl, and you often showed me off. You loved having me with you. Overnight wasn't enough. No matter what others said or what the world thought, I always loved you deeply in every inch of my heart. You may have hurt my feelings and caused me to become sad, but no one loves perfectly. You were still my dynamite dad. It hurts that you are gone and realizing we'll never go shopping again. No more football games together. Go Birds. No more spades to play and win. I can't describe the pain I feel. I don't know where to begin. I know you thought you failed me, and that often caused you distress. But you had so much weight to carry. I know that you did your very best. All of my memories of you are good. Yep, just the good times we had. When I burst into laughter, I hear you, and that makes my heart so glad. And now that your race is complete, I still crown you my dynamite dad. So, my dad, when I first met him, you know, he was the love of my life. He cherished me, but he had issues. So he's the one who would discover his wife, his newlywed wife, in her forever sleep, and he tried to wake her up and he couldn't. And my grandmother shared with me that he had been abusive with her while she was living, and I know that it crushed his heart. To lose your spouse shortly after marriage is tragic enough, but then to have regrets because you didn't treat them the best that you could while you had them with you has to be hard. So I asked him about that one day when I was an adult, and he said, I pushed her, shoved her once, but I never really like hit her. So that's abuse, you know what I mean? And a lot of times he probably was drunk or high and don't even remember the things that he did. But at any rate, he found my mother and her forever asleep, and he was just gone. The demons that oppressed him, and just gone. So that's why my grandmother raised me. So I would visit with him. There was a couple of times that my grandma even allowed him to come and live with us, but he was sold out to crack and all types of drugs or whatever. So he was never stable. He would get on and off and on and off. But I do remember this one time. I think I may have been around, I want to say 8, 9, or 10, between those ages, and he lived right across the street from me. And boy, oh boy, I would cross that street and go see my dad. I stayed at his door. I remember just feeling so good about him being that close. And I would go over there and we would play music. I had good times when I was younger. It wasn't until I became a teenager that I started to hate and resent him, because at 13 I would go after boys or whatever and start getting my heart broke and everything like that. And I just didn't have a role model. And he was still void. He was still in the drugs. And, I started to become angry because he was the only parent I had and he wasn't there for me. So then he went off to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and to a rehab, and got himself together, found him a new wife. This would be his third wife. His second wife, they had a lot of bets with abuse and stuff like that. I seen, him get hit over the head with a 40 bottle and blood and cops and all that stuff, traumatic, that I was around. He would go off Williamsport, find him a new wife, clean himself up, and I was so troubled, drinking, boys, messing up in school, straight F's on my report card in the 7th grade. I just became a real rebellious child. My grandmother, older, in her 70s, couldn't really deal with me. She sent me up there. I resented him for getting his life together and giving his all and his best to other people, his new wife, her kids, the grandkids, all that, because his new wife was significantly older than him. So I stayed up there for one school year, and I broke his heart, I believe, because I just didn't want to be with him. So I'm thinking back now, imagine getting yourself together, establishing yourself, and now you can finally get your daughter, and she don't even want to be with you. She don't want to be around you. And I pressed, I want to go back home. I want to go back home. And the main reason why I wanted to go back home, I think now, is because I got my heart broke from a guy, but I still had a lot of resentment toward him, and I saw how he bonded with his step-grandson, and I believe I was jealous, and I'm trying to remember. A lot of stuff got blocked out. That's why I'm speaking that way. But I believe I was jealous, yeah. So I just was allowed to go back home to Philadelphia to live with my grandmother. Looking back now, they should have just been like, I'm sorry, but you are 14 years old, and this is your father, and this is where you gonna stay. You be all right. But my stepmother at the time, she said, if she don't want to live here, do not force her to live here. She won't be happy or whatever. So she kind of talked him into just letting me go. So shortly after I left, he went back to drugs. I know that broke his heart. Not saying it was my fault. I think that if he was a strong enough dad and put his foot down, things could have been different. So I would go back to Philly or whatever. He would go back to drugs, and then that would just kind of be it. So from the ages of 14, 15, 16, I wouldn't see him for years. Didn't know if he was dead or alive. He would pop up at my doorstep. And I could tell he was on drugs, so I would be mean, push him away, and that was kind of it. Now, when I turned around 21 and he came around and I let him live with me, my grandmother had died, and I let him live with me in my childhood house, he stole. He stole from me, and it was for me to give my aunt the rent money, for me to pay the bills. So he stole. He went back on drugs. My son was having his 3rd birthday party, and all the people were putting money in his pocket. He took the money out of his grandson's pocket on his birthday to go get high. He took food stamps. I was on public assistance. He took food stamps. He took rent, and then I kicked him out, and he told his mother, my grandmother, and she called me up and she says, "It's not your house to kick him out." So she was all for her son no matter what he did, and that's how that kind of went. My father was supposed to be my hero. My father made a promise to my mother, that if she left, he would take care of me. He was breaking his promise. He couldn't get delivered from them demons of addiction, alcoholism, all those things that he was into. So he couldn't get free. It was another time when he went to rehab, in and out of rehab. When he came out of rehab this time, in my middle 20s, and he just showed up at my front door. And he was fresh out of rehab. So I'm always loving my dad, want him to be the dad he never was, so I welcome him in. Work at this job that takes me out of ways, and he volunteers to babysit my son, and he's living in my apartment, and I have a car, so I drive to this place. I felt like I was on the way up. So I had a car, I had an apartment, I had a job, and I felt like all was well. I was fornicating at that time, and I'm not proud of that, but that's what I was into. I had my own demonization that I was dealing with, and I had no idea because I didn't know about stuff like that, but I had spirits of perversion and lust on me, and I just could not shake as much as I wanted to, as much as I said that I was a Christian. It was just like I kept falling into that sin. And so he stole my rent money, stole the food stamps, left me high and dry as it pertains to a babysitter, and then told my grandmother that he walked down into my garage and saw me naked in the car having sex, and we got into a fight, and he couldn't live with me no more. Like, he did some radical stuff. Like, it was weird because when I ended up talking to my grandmother, she just took up for him. And it was just like, I don't even know if she believed that he took the money from me or whatever, because he got to her and told her lies, because she had several properties that she would, just let him live in. And so that was like a real hurtful time for me, because I ended up losing that job, losing the apartment, car broke down, and a lot of that was consequences for how I was living. I don't blame anything on my dad, because at the end of the day, I could have said no when he showed up to my doorstep, and I could have been living better, and God could have been protecting me based off of me being obedient. So I don't blame him for it. But that was a hurtful thing to do to your daughter, you think. So, on and on that would go. You know what I mean? On again, off again, on again, off again. So, I always still wanted my dad in our relationship. That never stopped. Now, moving along, I ended up getting married. He wasn't there. He was out on drugs or whatever. But when I was married, he started hanging out again. And then he went off the deep end. He went back into rehab or whatever. And then he was getting an SSI check, and when he was on his way getting out of the rehab, he wanted me to take his SSI check and save it up so when he got out, he would have a place. When I say demonization, I really want you guys to believe that you can be a Christian and be demonized. I ain't say demon possessed, but demonized, because I would take my dad's. Now, he ain't say take the whole check. He said you can have some, take $100 or whatever for yourself each check or whatever. He was being, nice to me. But I think it might have been around 6 to 8 months worth of checks, and I took every last dime of it. I took every last dime of it. And what the enemy kept feeding in my head is, he owe you. You could give it back some other time. This long overdue. Who cares? Like, just craziness, right? That's your dad. Where he gonna live? Now he gonna have to come live with you. Like, real. So, I did that. And, it's kind of like you think you forgave somebody, but you didn't, because you're doing that type of stuff. But when I told my dad that I spent every last dime, I was crying, I felt bad, I felt horrible, I was beating myself up. Let me tell you, he was like, it's okay. I'm like, what? How is it okay? It was okay. He forgave me. He came and lived with me for a little while. We saved up. I helped him get an apartment. And then I was like, down his apartment, sewing him some curtains. We was blending again. I felt good. And then one day he came up to watch a football game with me, my husband, and my son or whatever. And I smelled alcohol. Oh, wait, let me backtrack real quick. So my dad was getting himself together so much. He walked to my house, which was a few miles. He was in his mid-50s rather, and he put up my ceiling and my living room. Like, he was just being a real active dad again. And then this one day he came by and we was watching football, and I smelled alcohol in his breath, and he went to hug me, and I pushed him away, and I was so angry because I felt like once you start getting drunk, here come the drugs again, and I finally got you back and you're doing this again. And so I just gave him a real ice cold shoulder. And then a few days after that, he would go to see his doctor. And then after he seen his doctor, he laid down and went to sleep and never woke up again. And my husband came and got me. And he picked me up from a job. I was working with at-risk teen girls. And I got in the car. It was like he was looking sad, and I couldn't understand why. And my son was in the back seat, and he says, your dad died. So when he said your dad died, it sounded like Charlie Brown, like it didn't make sense. I couldn't comprehend it. My dad was fine. He wasn't overweight. He would walk for long periods of time. He did have knee surgery. So my belief is I have two beliefs. Maybe the knee surgery thing went left, and it made it had caused some complications. Something happened in his body, or he could have committed suicide because he saw himself going down a road. The autopsy wasn't delivered, so I don't know the real reason why he was at the hospital and he was on his deathbed and they didn't notice it and pick it up. But when my husband told me that information, the car is driving, I proceed to open the door and just walk out the car while it's rolling, because where that information was delivered, I wanted to get away from it because I couldn't believe it. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, why was he joking? But then I said, right after that, I thought he would never joke like that. So he drives me to my dad's apartment, and my dad is laying on a deflated airbed in these ice cold brick. And my first reaction was, you better really have been saved. You better really have been saved. And I just cried and I just prayed. And I just felt like, God, I'm not supposed to have no parents. I'm in my 30s and I was just not supposed to have no parents. And things that God allowed in my life that I felt like was gut wrenching, and more things that I would need to overcome and have to deal with, um, and that would cause me to be depressed, I would feel like bitterness towards him, So this made me bitter. Um, I didn't want to live. I couldn't sleep. I had insomnia, and I remember somebody suggesting that I get some Tylenol PMs to help me get sleep. So I got a big giant BJ's, which is like Costco's size of Tylenol PMs. And when the suicide ideations wouldn't stop, I remember getting up, taking a big giant bottle of pills and putting them in the toilet. With 2 failed attempts at suicide in my history, I just didn't want to play with it. So I did that, and but I really didn't want to live. I felt so hopeless, and the pain was so strong. I couldn't see how it would ever let up. I couldn't comprehend that joy would come in the morning. I didn't quite believe that I would be able to smile again and live a joy-filled life with the heaviness of the pain, But I do want to say that no matter what my dad did, it didn't change how much I loved him, because when we had our good times, they were so good. And I knew that he really wanted to be there for me. And when I would go to clean out his apartment, and I ended up finding journal entries and things that he wrote while he was in the rehab, I saw his heart. And he had a broken heart because he couldn't be the dad that he wanted to be to me. And that's when it clicked, how much he really, really loved me, and how much he really wanted to be my dynamite dad. So, I know a lot of people have daddy issues. I know that. I know that a lot of people, especially in our culture, doesn't have fathers in the home. But the thing about it is, you have to make the choice to not allow that to dictate who you are and who you become. Having daddy issues can ruin all relationships, friendships, marriages, son, children, or it could just ruin relationships, because if you don't heal from the trauma, if you don't allow God to do his work in you, then it could carry over and end up damaging a lot of relationships. So the reason why I'm sharing that testimony is to say, as it pertains to dads, I had a pretty rough situation there. You know what I'm saying? But God said, if your mother and your father forsake you, he will take you up. He will be your father. And I realized that because I had such a troubling relationship with my earthly father, that had a lot to do with how I couldn't really accept God the Father as my father. That was really hard, for me to get. Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the plans that I have for you. Plans for you to prosper, not to harm you, to give you hope in the future. And when I experienced so much trauma and pain, it was like, how is that true? But that is my favorite verse, because I always wanted to believe that. And I believe it now, and I know it to be true. And I'm actually walking in the abundant life right now. So I grieved my father how I needed to grieve him. But I say one of the best things that he could ever do is write down how he felt about me, because that healed me. I wish that I could have treated him better. I wish that I could have, maybe even suggested he get some counseling or help, or we do some group counseling as a family, or whatever the situation is. But I want you to learn from what I didn't do. My father, when he was raised, he told me a lot of stories, and his parents would, one of the stories was they would tie him up in the basement and beat him with an extension cord, tie him up to the pipes in the basement and beat him with an extension cord for punishment. So when he turned 18, he went straight to the military or whatever. So he was abused a lot. He was a product of, I guess it was about 7 of them, and a lot of them struggled. Majority of them struggled. So if they know better, they would do better. Parents are literally doing the best that they can. It's not right. But if you don't heal and you don't forgive and you don't chase after God and let him be your parent and let him use whatever he's allowed for the good, you're not going to be all that he has you to be. You're not going to be all that what he created you to be, and your relationships will struggle, and you won't be walking in an abundant life. So I don't want that for anyone. I did not want that for me. And so I am healed and I am set free, and I do believe that my Father is in heaven, and we can meet up again. So you be encouraged. Be the best father you can be. Forgive your father. And that's my testimony. I thank you so much for being here. And next week, I got more for you. Peace.